much better.
No.
He does, look at him, that looks good. He must not eat meat. Clean.
No, Chris may be unserious right now. Okay. Thank you all for joining us today. Today I come before you to discuss the recent bills and proposals that were highlighted in the governor's Safe Alabama legislative packet, as well as other related bills that would help ensure fair and humane justice. I think we all can agree that reducing crime should be a top priority, especially as gun violence remains the #1 cause of death for Alabama children. When we discuss crime, I think we need to talk about more specifics. The data I am about to share with you comes from the Uniform Crime Reporting, UCR, program of the FBI. The data shows that Alabama's violent crime rate paints a grim picture, with a homicide rate of 13.9 per 100,000 residents, which is more than twice than New York City. Rural areas in Alabama are not too far behind, with a homicide rate of 11 per 100,000 people. In addition, Alabama law enforcement agencies reported a staggering 20,759 violent crimes in the past year. This figure includes rape, murder, robbery, and aggravated assaults. Last year, property crimes in Alabama reached an alarming 88,240 reported incidents. This category encompasses burglary, theft, motor vehicle theft, and alike. The sheer volume of these crimes affect communities statewide, impacting both urban and rural areas. As you can see, we cannot let this be normal. And as a caucus, we agree with the governor and our colleagues across the aisle that we need to take meaningful, immediate, and effective steps to reducing crime. And although well-intentioned, the Safe Alabama package seems to miss the mark in many ways and appears to be focused more on punishment and dealing with the crime after the fact, instead of focusing on preventing the crimes in the first place. For example, when we look at one part of the governor's proposal called the Inner City Gun Violence Act, it is comprised of several bills that would do the following: establish a new felony offense for a person possessing a firearm while on bail, awaiting trial for certain violent offenses, expand Aniah's law, add to the list of crimes that already where you can be denied bail, and revoking parole for a person unlawfully in possession of a firearm. Certainly, there may be different perspectives on what constitutes an appropriate punishment for different types of crimes. But how does the Inner City Gun Violence Act work? As an effective crime prevention strategy, also, what's inner city? What is that? What is an inner city? In Alabama, is she referring to when the data shows that the rural areas are equally impacted by gun violence? In a state that is spending billions of dollars on a new mega prison that will be overcrowded one day, on day one, why do we think that continually increasing penalties, along with working to prevent and deter crime when the evidence shows otherwise? That's why we support community policing, evidence-based gun violence prevention programs, and increase investments in services and meaningful activities for our youth. That's why we support bills like Representative Barbara Drummond's bill, HB 103, that ensures parents store their guns safely to keep them out of the reach of children, to prevent tragedies, and to make sure that the children are safe at home and at school. This doesn't infringe on anyone's Second Amendment rights. And it's something that any responsible parent or responsible gun owner would want to do. This is also why we will continue to fight for the repeal of the permitless concealed carry permit law, which resulted in 11% of increase in homicide throughout the state of Alabama, in any state that it has been enacted in. I'll close by saying this. Alabama has always been and continue to be tough on crime, but we are soft when it comes to preventing crime on successful reintegration of offenders back into public life who have completed their sentences back into society where they should belong. If we are serious about creating a safe Alabama, we have to do more than just lock them up and throw away the key. We must focus on implementing proven crime prevention strategies and taking immediate action to end the statewide crisis on gun violence. And that remains the leading cause of death among our children in the state of Alabama. With that being said, I'd like to introduce you to Representative Prince Chestnut.
Thank you, Representative Tillman. I'll begin by saying that Tillman makes a very strong point regarding crime prevention. As Benjamin Franklin once said, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. That's why I'm deeply troubled by another aspect of the Safe Alabama package that the governor calls the Back the Blue Legal Protection Act, which consists of HB 202, which is sponsored by Representative Reynolds. In its current form, this bill would drastically expand what is commonly known as qualified immunity for a police officer, making it nearly impossible to criminally prosecute. It'll make it hard to sue or even bring any type of civil action against an officer that violates the law or harms civilians or knowingly defies departmental rules and procedures. This bill would place a bad police officer who is not upholding his or her oath to protect and serve above the law. This could potentially impact cases that are already pending. Under current law, it is very difficult, if not almost impossible, to hold a bad officer criminally or civilly accountable when they violate the law or departmental procedures. Why would we make it even harder to hold them accountable in cases where they have clearly misbehaved, where they have deliberately violated policies and procedures? While we highly respect our law enforcement community, we also believe that being a police officer doesn't mean one has a license to exceed their authority with impunity, nor does it justify illegal acts performed in bad faith. We expect our police to protect and serve us, and those that did not should be held accountable for their actions. How does enacting a bill that grants undue, wide-ranging, blanket immunity to those in uniform who break and breach their oath, breach the law, or carelessly violate departmental policies, how does that create a safer Alabama? If there's no transparency or accountability for those who have sworn to protect and serve us, how will this make our neighborhood safer? Make no mistake, we strongly support law enforcement, and that's why we've supported legislation to allow officers to take home more of their pay. We fought to keep permits for concealed carry, and we've worked to ensure that they have the tools and the resources that they need to fight crime. However, in our modern age that seemingly has cameras almost everywhere, including body cams on the police themselves, we have seen far too many cases in which a bad officer has engaged in clearly unjustified and unlawful or even violent or deadly behavior and has avoided any criminal or civil accountability. That is not justice, and that does not make Alabama safe. It also doesn't back the blue because the overwhelming amount of good law-abiding police officers out there welcome transparency and accountability. They understand that they are safer patrolling our neighborhoods when they know that they have the trust and the respect of the people in which they serve. As we said recently in our Caucus press release, to be clear, we back the blue, but we have more work to do. I want to thank you for this opportunity, and at this time, I would like to introduce Representative Christopher England.
Thank you, Representative Tillman and Representative Chestnut. As I was listening to my colleagues, I kept coming back to the idea that we must be smart in our approach to crime, smart in our efforts to prevent and deter it, as well as smart in how we apply legal punishments as righteous justice, but also as a means of correcting future behavior and minimizing recidivism. After all, isn't that what we call it the Department of Corrections, as opposed to the Department of Incarcerations? In order to create a safe Alabama, it's going to take an innovative and comprehensive strategy that addresses several key issues simultaneously, rather than our current approach of continually increasing criminal penalties as the sole answer to the problem of crime. If harsh sentences were truly effective tools to deter and prevent crime, Alabama should be the safest place in America. But of course, we're not. I think sometimes folks forget that most people who are incarcerated for a crime will be released one day after they've completed their sentence. So we have to ask ourselves, what has the Department of Corrections done to protect public safety by helping to ensure that a person being released is on a viable path to successfully reintegrate into our society? Were they eligible for parole? And if so, was the parole process used as an effective means to assist them to be independent, law-abiding citizens once they've completed their sentences and are no longer being supervised by the state? The answer is very clearly no, and we haven't done very much to make that happen. In fact, not much at all, except to make it increasingly more difficult for those who genuinely want to change their lives. That's because we've created a punitive pardons and parole system based on retribution, rather than rehabilitation, that does little to help those who are paying or who have paid their debt to society and are honestly trying to turn their lives around for the better. As Frederick Douglass once said, where justice is denied, where poverty is enforced, where ignorance prevails, and where any one class is made to feel that society is an organized conspiracy to oppress, rob, and degrade them, neither persons nor property will be safe. That insight and description of justice is why I introduced House Bill 40, which would create the Criminal Justice Policy Development Council to address the problems that we have identified with our current pardons and parole system. This council would oversee the development and implementation of a validated risk and needs assessment for offenders, parole release guidelines, and classification systems and guidelines of the inmates that are currently incarcerated. This would make the entire process fair and would better protect our public safety because it would rely primarily on clear and objective standards and guidelines as opposed to subjective opinions and conjecture. Additionally, in cases where there was a justifiable reason to deviate from the parole release guidelines, the board would be required to state its reasons and provide appellate relief or due process for inmates who are negatively affected by this board's decisions. This bill will ensure that people on parole are at minimal risk to society and, hopefully, put them on a path for successful reentry and lowering the chances of them reoffending. This will also help alleviate the overcrowding in our prisons. Prison overcrowding is also a significant threat to public safety. That's why we continue to resist efforts to perpetually increase penalties for certain offenses without evidence that the prior increases that made those sentences harsher or longer were actually effective. The same is true with our local jail populations, where some people end up incarcerated for long periods of time simply because they can't afford to make bail. That's why I've also sponsored House Bill 42, which would authorize the court to accept a cash deposit in an amount less than the total sum upon approval of the judicial officer setting the cash bail. Not only is this the right thing to do ethically and morally, it also frees up space in the jail for those who pose a more serious threat to public safety. On top of that, taxpayers aren't having to pay to incarcerate someone who poses little or no threat to the community simply because they can't afford to pay their bail. And also, the money that they do spend, the cash, instead of going to a bondsman, it'll actually go to the court system to pay for rehabilitation, court costs, and to the victim themselves. Ultimately, these are the types of laws and measures that can truly make Alabama safe if they are implemented as a comprehensive strategy that begins with crime prevention, but also ends with helping people who have broken the law to turn their lives around for the better. I think it's important to remind everyone that we prosecute criminals, we prosecute crimes and not people. There's an old saying that goes, if all you have is a hammer, then everything becomes a nail. And that seems to be our one-tool approach to crime and justice in our state. The result has not been good because we're dealing with increases in crime, exploding prison populations, and skyrocketing costs to deal with crime after the fact, rather than focusing on proven ways to prevent it. Thank you. And at this time, we probably got about no time, but if you have a few questions, we'll try to entertain them and answer them as quickly as possible.
I understand there's a sub coming on 202, that's the blue. Does that make it significantly better or worse, or do you have any comments on the sub?
To be honest with you, there's so many people involved in negotiating what the bill looks like. It's hard to tell you what's in the sub and what's not, because it's constantly changing. It's a moving target. Because if we want to understand, the governor's office has been negotiating with so many different people that I don't know if any of us could tell you what the final version of that bill is going to look like.
It's still scheduled for committee though,
Yeah,
Yes.
it's a committee now.
It's scheduled for, I think it's a public hearing today.
Yeah, public hearing today.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
All right. See y'all downstairs.
Yeah.
All right, thank you all.